So yeah, as I mentioned, now I am creating surreal paintings inspired by biological forms in science. And on one hand, I simply want to bring to light the complexity and beauty of the world around us by showing these forms and patterns in nature. But on a deeper level, they also represent, as a whole, the observable parts of our reality, the concrete world that we observe every day. But that is only half of my work. The other half is the surreal and mysterious half, or the unobservable parts of reality. This, in juxtaposition and in combination with the observable, concrete, science-type elements, paints a broader picture of reality or life as a whole. So I want to begin with, like I said, a few paintings to show you what I've been up to, my current style that I'm describing to you. And this painting here is titled The Mind's Eye. It's from 2015. And I wanted to start with this one because it represents what I'm talking about kind of clearly. Well, once I explain it. But in these red-ish dishes, there are elements of science, kind of foundational scientific elements and patterns in nature. You'll see a honeycomb pattern, which we see not just in the honeycomb, but at so many levels of nature. Above that is a chromosome, a water droplet, crystal, photon, and above that, to the left of that sort of explosion, is like a branching pattern or networking pattern. Basically looks like a tree, but that's, to me, represents, and you'll see it in a lot of my work, that pattern that we see at so many levels of nature, in our own vascular system, in trees, and in their roots, obviously, right down through the leaves in a microscopic level, and on a larger scale, like rivers and streams, and even conceptually, I see it like whether you're talking about evolution or the tree of life, or how events are connected in your life. So there's sort of, and people and other things, one thing leads to another, like that pattern, like that physical pattern, but in a conceptual way. So those, again, are like the scientific elements, kind of separate from the rest of the painting. And then there's the other side I mentioned, the surrealism, the creative side, the subconscious side, or mysterious side of life. And that is largely represented by like these purple swirly patterns, and they're just this really free-flowing creative pattern. And that the two elements kind of swirl together, the scientific and the creative kind of come together into that explosion, almost like you could see it as a big bang, or to me that sort of represents just everything, life as a whole, and it's exploding and creating, branching off again, and kind of creating these smaller explosions. That pattern was based on a map of the universe. It doesn't have that shape to it. I created my own shape to it, but just that general pattern of different densities was based on the map of the universe.
How large a piece is it?
And though that piece is 24 by 30 inches.
Oh.
Yeah. So anyway, that piece kind of sums up the general concepts, and I'll be explaining more of that through the rest of my work. But here's a piece titled Back to the Earth from 2012, based on various biological and anatomical elements. For example, that's a type of mushroom in the center, that green swirly thing. But again, I did my own thing with that. But I'm just going to kind of cruise through a few of these to get started. But this one is called Universal Meditation. Some shell elements. I used the golden ratio in this, which is something that you would see in shells. But I also used that on the white circles at the top to create that pattern. And this one is the one that's here. The physical painting is here, called Foundational Shift, and that's from 2018. And so backing up now to around 2004 or so, when I was in Minnesota in college, and these were some sculptures I was working on. Found wood and plaster. These were titled, I have a few of these I'll show you. I did a series of them, maybe 8 or 9 of them, titled Balance number 1, 2, 3, etc. And this is around the time I finally felt like I was kind of creating something that I felt confident in. I felt confident in the medium. Was kind of excited about what I was creating for the first time, and sort of starting to develop a style. Oh, and that piece was maybe a few feet wide. This piece is maybe 18 inches long or so.
Is that, what is the white?
So that is the plaster element, and the wood is just found pieces of wood, and then there's a wire structure underneath the plaster element, and I would attach it to the wood element, drill holes and whatever, and bend the wire to shape. This is fairly narrow, but on a larger scale, like the previous image, that's maybe 5, even 6 inches wide or so in the wider parts. I'd use a chicken wire to create the form, and then cheesecloth with plaster, and then more layers of plaster, and then I'd have to sand it back down to create the texture that I wanted. And there's another one that's a few feet tall. That one's disintegrating in my backyard at the moment. It just kind of fell apart. These were still experiments, even though I mentioned that I was creating things that I kind of felt were worth showing at this point. Still experiments, still rough. Especially this one is very delicate. It was barely attached at the bottom there, and that was kind of what I was going for, pushing the limits a little bit to what I could create and see where the medium would take me, but not the most sturdy thing. And then, so I took a little break from college, moved to Arcata, California, with some friends and bandmates in, I think it was like 2004, 2005, and the first time really out west and seeing the Pacific Ocean, and spent a year out there, and just sort of created this painting in my spare time when I wasn't like at the beach or in the redwoods exploring and whatnot, and just kind of did this for fun. It's a watercolor. I think it's probably about 18 by 24 or so, and a lot of people do notice the beachy elements in it, aside from the shell towards the center there, but and this, like I said, very free-flowing and kind of just developing a style and just really doing that for fun. This piece is titled Humbled. And then moved back after that year to Minnesota and finished school and spent a lot of time in the ceramic studio at this point. And I guess I wanted to mention too that this painting was, so this is about 6 years before I started painting again really at all, at least in my current style. So about 6 years of a painting break, and that was just like one random painting I did. But yeah, so I spent a lot of time in the ceramic studio doing these just very free form sculptures. That one's probably 8 inches long or so. And again, unfortunately most of these are shattered, got shattered in the mail at one point. I do have one that's not in the landfill. It is broken, but it's at my house, a little bit glued together. And yeah, so I just started adding bits and pieces of clay together and going with the flow, basically. kind of developing the style, as I mentioned, and these will later influence my painting. I think also working with sculpture helped me see form, helped me see 3 dimensions, and it would help me later when I started painting. And I should mention quickly too that the reason I focused on sculpture and ceramics, especially looking back, was to take advantage of the studio space and the materials that were offered in school. I felt that paying all that money, being there to just set up a canvas didn't make as much sense to me. I could do that pretty inexpensively anywhere. But to take advantage of all the kilns and the materials and the tools. And at that time, I didn't really have a focus. So, just at that age, just playing with materials and finding your style. So there's another piece.
So, sure. Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Like are those plaster too? And with that, or those aren't? Or
These are ceramics.
Yeah, because I didn't know if you could color the plaster after because all the plaster was white.
Right. Oh, what was the last part?
I didn't know if you could color the plaster. I thought it was maybe colored plaster painted on top of it or something.
Right. Yeah, these last few were ceramics pieces.
Yeah.
And this also ceramic. This one's a few feet wide, called 3 Ways to Get Somewhere. And that just kind of came randomly from the shape. Again, this, I don't know, well, maybe I did have a little bit of a sketch for this one, actually, I think. But just seeing the straight line, the curvy line, and then on the right, you can see a little hole, and that goes through the other side, and it kind of reminded me of like a wormhole, and just kind of thinking about space-time and those concepts. And then the next few images are a small series that I titled Sprout, Sprout 1, 2, and 3. They looked to me like sprouts, and at the time I also felt like it was fitting for me as a person, as an artist, really. Felt like I was emerging, sprouting from underneath, finding my style more, creating things that I was happier with. Everything else before was kind of experimenting. I mean, now I look back, and of course this was experimenting too, but really at that sprouting phase, and I recognized that I wasn't fully grown, but I was at least kind of sprouting. And these are all about maybe 2.5 feet tall or so. And here's a sculptural installation I did my senior year in school. So probably 2000, yeah, it would have been 2006. Those are all suspended with fishing line, and there's a ceramics piece, several pieces making up the sort of one piece in the center, and then plaster are all those rough S-curve shapes. And it worked perfectly. This wall was an S-curve in like the same has the same sort of feel as those S-curve plaster pieces. And there's part of the same installation in the corner. And all of this plaster is also in the landfill. It was largely destroyed in a storm. It was being stored in my parents' barn. Tree came through the roof and everything got wet. And I think they were already kind of starting to rust through too because of the chicken wire structure underneath the plaster. But it's fine with me. It's part of the learning process. And what was I going to do with all of this stuff anyway? But it was just being stored in boxes, and so. And you can see a couple of the pieces I showed you earlier, that here, like 3 Ways to Get Somewhere, and another small ceramics piece in there as well. Had a lot of fun setting that up. And these next few images are of some drawings, charcoal drawings I did, which began in a life drawing class in college and finished most of them later. I kind of just got them to a starting point with the use of the models in the classroom. In this one's a little harder to see the figures, but you might be able to see some representation of the figure. In this assignment, this was after at least 4 or 5 semesters of figure drawing, and in this assignment, our professor asked us to include 100 figures on one sheet of paper, and we didn't have to take that literally, and I certainly didn't. But it inspired me to break down the parts of the figure that I found interesting from the model, and just kind of lay out bits and pieces, and it forced me to develop, or allowed me really to develop a style and turn my figure drawing into my own thing instead of just another figure drawing over and over again, and just these quick sketches or long 3-hour drawings. But for the figure, started to do my own thing with that, and obviously adding a lot of my own creative elements. But this would really inform my painting later too, that style of breaking my inspiration down into pieces and melting them, transforming them, adding my own creative elements. That piece was called Sleeping, by the way, and these are all about 18 by 24, I believe. And this piece is titled Waking. And again, I just kind of had the general line and composition set in from the classes, and after I graduated, completed them. And this one is called Knowing. I think I did 6 or 7 of these types of drawings. So we're at about 2008 now, once I finished those. And then on to painting. So I should mention too, after I graduated in 2006, I moved to Santa Cruz, California with the same friends and bandmates, continued playing music. I didn't have much time for art, but that's when I was able to sort of work on those drawings a little bit because I already had them started. And then the band sort of fizzled out, came to an end, and allowed me time to pick up the paint again and just started painting and looking for inspiration. Came across an anatomy book, Gray's Anatomy, and just kind of doing it for fun, really, like the painting I showed you earlier, the watercolor, that was from 6 years before this one. So this is about, I think I started in 2009, finished it 2010. I spent several months on it, just kind of in my spare time, and again, very free-flowing, but I went back to that drawing style, maybe even not consciously, but taking just the bits and pieces that I found inspiring out of the anatomy book and placing them sort of randomly in sort of in this case more of a landscape format. I think this is where some of the surrealist influence came in from, like Salvador Dali, for example. But this is much more like a cross-section type format, but a little bit of a landscape feel to it. And so just for example, there's the female reproductive system kind of on the top left. Below that, in the grass sort of area, is like based on the anatomy of the vascular system in the head. We have below that is a spine and ribs, but again, with those ribs here, obviously extending them and doing my own thing with those. I believe this is based on the lung tissue. And so yeah, while living in Santa Cruz too, I did the Open Studios art tour they have in their county, and so just kind of starting to show my work. And long story short, on the final day of I lived out in the boonies too. I was the furthest out person on the tour from Santa Cruz, and it was down this long, windy, bumpy road. But I had some visitors the first weekend, and they do a second weekend, and on the last day it was pouring rain all day, and I really didn't expect anybody to come out. And no one did all day, basically. Actually ended up turning on a football game, and being from Minnesota, I was a Vikings fan, and they happened to be on. I was getting into that, and wouldn't you know it, the final drive of the game, it's like the last nail-biting minutes within one score, and someone shows up in the driveway, and part of me was actually like, oh, really, now? Can you show up at the end of this game? You know, I was like so out of the art mindset at that point. I was into the game, which was sad. But of course, part of me was very happy to see and excited to see somebody showing up. And also thought, well, they must be pretty interested if they drove through the pouring rain to my house way out in the boonies, down that bumpy, windy road. So, long story short, he ended up buying this painting. At way too small of a price, but you know, you gotta start somewhere. And funny thing is, a few years later, he asked if I would try to take it back and try to resell it, and I did for about more than 4 times the amount. So it was kind of nice to get some more money out of it for me, but he was happy too because he got an investment out of it too. But anyway, so yeah, that's the beginning, and I was happy with it, and I sold it, and I think that encouraged me to just keep going too. And this is the second piece I did. It's a triptych. So yeah, I think we're getting into maybe, well, it's probably 2010 still. As I mentioned, this triptych, it has the 3 levels. I see on the bottom level is kind of a cellular level, pre-life sort of level. In the center you have the womb and embryo, and on the top, to me, is sort of beyond life or bigger than life, with that sort of airy feeling, and the spiral almost could remind you of like a galaxy or something. And here's just an image out of my sketchbook. I copied and cut out some pieces from the anatomy book that I found inspiring, thought I might use. On the bottom, it's turned 90 degrees, but in the bottom center is actually, also happens to be in the bottom center. Oh, it's a little bit cut off, but in the bottom center of that painting. So this is an example. And this one is called Slice of Home. It's based on the layers of the skin, hair follicles, and then put into sort of a landscape format again. And as you can see, the hairs are arranged in perfect rows. I think that came from possibly growing up in southern Minnesota and all the cornfields there, possibly. Wasn't a conscious decision, but looking back on it, that's maybe where that came from, and I think why I titled it Slice of Home. Home being Minnesota, but also home being your body, and it's a literal sort of slice from your layers of your skin. This was based on the anatomy of the eye, and in the center you can sort of see a landscape, also a very southern Minnesota looking landscape. Looking through there. This one's called Inward Perception of Outward Illusions. So just kind of thinking about our own personal perceptions of the outer world. And going along the theme of sort of the anatomy of different senses, this is based on the anatomy of the inner ear. A lot of people see an apple tree, which I do as well, but, and again, kind of that cross-section feel, being inspired by the anatomy book, where you see a lot of these cross-sections and layers, showing you the different layers. But that is the cochlea there, that looks like the apple tree. the inner ear. And again, that's kind of something I enjoy doing, and one part of the painting might look like one thing, can be another based on another thing. It's really just a painting, so it's kind of open to interpretation. And another one based on the sense of smell. We have a layer of bone here, sort of in a tannish color. Above that is the olfactory bulbs, which send the smell signals to your brain. And that, again, kind of looks like is multiple things at once. Turned into a landscape format, it kind of looks like clouds, like storm clouds and lightning. And this piece is kind of a significant milestone here because it incorporated for the first time other forms from biology in addition to the anatomy. You can see this piece in the center is called a radiolarian. That is a single cell organism from the ocean, microscopic single cell. That is, and the piece on the right, the image on the top right and sort of top left as well. The two on the center and the one on the right are like the skeletal structures. The one on the left still has its like cell membranes and cell parts in it, and so that one's the live one. But my girlfriend and wife at the time, wife now, she found this book at a bookstore just kind of randomly and thought it would be inspiring to me, and I was pretty blown away when I saw it. I had no idea what they were, or if that was real, or if these were just these made-up drawings. But anyway, it's a real thing, and it was a book by Ernest Haeckel. He did these illustrations in the late 1800s. He really specialized in the radiolarians, illustrating thousands of them, but also did a lot of other biological illustrations. And I brought a couple books of his that I use for inspiration here if you want to look through those afterwards too. But so this really opened up a whole new world, and like I said, branched off of just the anatomy. And the title, Radiolarians Fight to Bridge the Gap Between Man and Nature, refers to, well, as the title suggests, that sort of gap between humans and nature, but also that we are nature and part of nature, but there's something about us that there seems to be a disconnect at times. And so this is that large gap here, and on the left you can see the natural forms of, again, that branching or networking structure of like the vascular system, and on the right is a more man-made version of that you maybe see in like a plumbing system or electrical system, but streets and whatnot, but just that man-made structure, but mimicking the organic structure. And the radiolarians I thought were representational of that bridge as well because of how man-made they look, and we don't often see such symmetry and geometry in nature, but we do see a little bit more of that, especially at the microscopic level. But and then on the left, for example, neurons representing sort of the human and nature, the two sides of that as well, how that's a natural form, organic form, but there's something about the human brain that seems to separate us from the rest of the world at times. And there's a page out of that book called Art Forms from the Ocean by Ernest Haeckel. Again, that book is here. And there's another painting using radiolarians as well as anatomical elements. This piece is titled It's All in Your Head. We're getting into 2013 now. It's all in your head, kind of having fun with that, because this is literally all in your head based on the anatomy of the brain, but also more conceptually just thinking about how, in a way, everything is all in our head. Every experience that we have is interpreted through our senses and ultimately our brain. Everything we see, touch, smell, etc. And this here is called Facets of Life. Again, kind of a play on words a little bit. The facets also refer to, this is based on the anatomy of a bee's eye. They have all these facets, they're called facets, each individual lens. They have these hexagonal lenses, and the top is a piece of pollen. And to get a little personal too, this is around the time, so about 9 months before this, I'd found out my mother had stage 4 cancer. And this is a piece I was working on when she had passed away, about 9 months after we found out. But it's kind of interesting because as I was creating this presentation, I was thinking about various significant points of my life and how it related to painting, and the pieces that I actually had in mind are more connected to my mom and her sickness and her passing, were months down the road, but especially the piece I'll get to, and it's about 6 months down the road from this one. And I didn't really have much of a recollection of this being related to her passing, even though looking back on the dates just recently, I realized that this was the one I was working on in March of 2013. So it's kind of an interesting sort of disconnect I seem to have there. This is a page out of the Ernest Haeckel Art Forms in Nature. I came across this book after the Radiolarian book, and this really blew my mind even more because the Radiolarians was a lot of the similar type images, and this was just all over the place. From I think these are types of slime molds. There's fungus, there's animals and insects and plants, and a lot of sea life though. And so it just really opened me up to so much inspiration. There's another page out of that. I think those are type of
echinoderms. They're echinoderms.
Yeah. I think there's what is that? The foraminifera. Some of them types of protozoa, but I think they're all types of protozoa and related to diatoms, etc.
What was the name of the book?
Art Forms in Nature, and I have that here as well. Art Forms from the Ocean and Art Forms in Nature from Ernest Haeckel. But I have those two here. So this piece is titled "Creation of Evolution." Using some radiolarians there on the left, you can see. Here's another one, but then I started using some of the other forms from that Art Forms in Nature book here. And I think that is based on a type of jellyfish. This piece is titled Resilience, and this is one of the first pieces that comes to my mind, has come to my mind over the years since my mom passed, as being connected to her, but it was, I guess, about 4 or 5 months after she passed. And again, I titled this Resilience, just kind of thinking about being resilient after that sort of trauma, and also this image here, you can kind of see it going through its life cycles, emerging and towards the back, and the center obviously kind of falling apart, and towards the back ultimately it's kind of going back into the earth. But I think this was based on a type of algae, which oftentimes I'll read about what I created after, or the subject matter that I painted after I've finished the painting. I often don't have a concept in mind beforehand. Sometimes I will, but so like in this case, I started reading about this type of algae and how it's very resilient, because it's actually a single cellular organism, but it has many cell parts, apparently many, like nuclei, for example. But if it gets, so it can get, you'd think it'd be very fragile, because if it got cut, for example, all the cell parts would just fall out and it would be gone, but apparently it can kind of heal itself, and quite the strong little organism. So I often will take those qualities, those unique qualities from the organisms that, in the subject matter that I use in a painting, and try to relate that to me or other just human experience in general, human emotion, human concepts. In this piece I especially relate to my mom, but it was done 6 months after she passed, and it was, again, interesting because I thought until recently that I had it in my head for some reason that this was the piece I was working on during that time that she'd passed, but apparently not. And it's called Hidden Light, and you can kind of see a light source behind this ribbon structure. You can kind of see some light rays coming through, and so, but the source of that light is hidden, so hidden light, and that also represented her being sort of a light in my life still, but hidden. She's not there anymore. And it also reminded, the colors, a different color scheme with this one too, much more pastel-y, and it kind of reminded me of her. And interestingly too, my dad for years had kind of been asking me about, he wanted to buy a painting, and I always felt a little bit weird about it. I never pushed it, of course. I didn't want to like sell to my dad, and just kind of like, oh, brushed it off. And anyway, long story short, I went back to Austin, Minnesota for an art fair they have, my hometown, and he got more serious about buying a painting, and was looking at, actually, I think the last one here, which I have a connection to my mom, as I mentioned, and then this one. And I didn't tell him anything about either one of them, but he was drawn to both of them and ended up going with this one. And then I told him that it was very interesting that he would choose that one, because it, to me, really is close and tied to my mom. And so kind of told him what I just told you about, you know, what I was thinking with this, and how apparently it reminded him of my mom as well. So it kind of, those moments really kind of make you feel like you're actually doing something, you know, not just having fun painting, that, you know, you maybe are conveying a little bit of a meaning, and it does mean something to other people, and maybe there is some sort of deeper connection when you, because I often just paint, as I've mentioned, with that sort of subconscious element to my work. There's the scientific and physical side of it, but there's the sort of mysterious unknown side of it as well. But sort of exploring the subconscious, which is basically what surrealism, I guess, is, to me anyway, is kind of all about. This piece is titled Circulation. I'll kind of breeze through these. We're getting kind of close, and we'll do some Q&A afterwards. So, but also kind of thinking about cycles of life with the title Circulation, and also exploring some new techniques here, and color schemes too. If you look at my website, really too, you can see all the images as a whole, kind of on the same page. You can see the color scheme change. We're getting into more of these cooler, pastelish colors, and also me playing with this transparency, trying to create different illusions. That's based on a jellyfish. This is an image out of another inspirational book called Supervision, I believe. This is a microscopic view of a zebrafish, that I believe is like, it's like a sensory hair on its surface of its skin or scales. And this is the painting I created based on that. A smaller painting, I think it's 11 by 14, maybe 12 by 16, and you know, just sticking with one general concept. So that to this, fairly literal representation, but obviously done my own thing with it too. This is based on cell division. Definitely a different color scheme, kind of an outlier there. I think that color scheme is based on or inspired by, well, probably this image itself, but you see this in a lot in like cell photography, in other microscopic photography, where they'll dye things and color things in, and there's often that bright colors with the black background. This was a commissioned by a marine biologist, throwing in elements that he had given me to work with. This is titled Everyday Alchemy, in 18 by 24. Everyday alchemy sort of referring to, in a sense, the alchemy or the miracles, you could call them, that just happen every day. We don't realize on the cellular level, for example, just what's going on inside of each of our own, I believe, trillions or whatever it is of cells in our body, and just everything. And I really have an appreciation for that, that small foundational level of nature. This is titled Human Nature. Just kind of thinking again about human nature, the way we do things, but also again humans and nature as separate terms. As you can see, some on the left, especially more man-made type structures, and the neurons down below. So a lot of similarities to the Radiolarians' fight to bridge the gap between man and nature painting I showed a little while back. That had also has the large chasm going off into the distance, and the neurons and man-made structures. Here's a little bit of a different piece, just kind of straightforward, simple style. This one is called Single Cell, based on the anatomy, based on my eye, my iris. Thought about calling it self-portrait, but went with single cell, talking about kind of a double meaning there. The single cell is, there's a radiolarian in the center, which is a single cell organism. Also playing with scale. This is more of the, on the outside is a much closer view of a radiolarian, the insides. But also kind of thinking about single cell is life, like being in this one body, this one mind, this one person, and not to be grim, but in a way it's like a cell, you're sort of trapped into it. And so just a kind of a double meaning with the title. But, the source, you see again a lot of the networking and branching patterns, and the source title referring to those having some type of source. So if it's your blood vessels or rivers and streams, or some sort of information traveling through that networking pattern, there's always like a source to it. Based on an octopus. Order and origin, thinking about the origins of life and the order that must ensue to create the world we live in. Sort of an order out of chaos theme. And yeah, I'll just kind of try to cruise through some more of these here, but just to show you how I've progressed or changed a little bit over the years. This is titled As Above, So Below. Just thinking about again, sort of different scales. You can see at the top it's a little bit cut off, but there's the yellow center and the peachy sort of pattern around it, and then it opens up towards the bottom, and then it starts to sort of repeat. You have these yellow dots, and then they're kind of expanding, and in here in the distance there's sort of a repetition of this. So it's kind of like, you could see it as like sort of multiverse type concept, or playing with scale, like, again, as the title mentions, as above, so below. And by the way, I think we're that was 2017, or maybe the beginning of 2018, so we're getting close here. And this is a 5x7 painting, smaller than I'd ever worked before. I did a few of these. I'll show you a couple more, a little series of paintings based on, again, that branching pattern, elements that look like trees. They're like, people call them trees, the tree paintings, but none of them are actually based on trees. This was based on a sponge, and there's neurons down below there too. That was actually kind of about the connection. This is inspired by an episode of Radiolab podcast where they were talking about the connections and communication happening in underground in forests, and it just kind of reminded, and how they're comparing it to sort of neurons in the brain.
The mycorrhizal, it's the,
Yeah.
the fungus,
Yeah, and fungus.
the mushroom interrelationship underneath the earth that nobody's aware of.
Yeah.
The fruiting bodies or the mushrooms.
Yeah, and I think, we're just kind of scratching the surface on what we know, and yeah, a lot of communication apparently happening down there, and symbiotic relationships. Very interesting. This was based on a sort of an arm of a gorgon-headed starfish, the top tree-looking part, and that tree-looking bit was based on a type of lichen. Again, that was a third of a series of 5x7s called Beneath the Surface, part 1, 2, 3, etc. I did a couple more later on too. And this, I believe, is my last image, one of my most recent pieces, except the piece that I brought on the right. This piece is titled Renewal. I think it's a 24 by 30. And as far as the evolution of my work, this piece may symbolize a little bit of a different step. It's got a little bit of a different background, especially in the sky, cloudy sky type background. I may start doing a little bit more of that, maybe even using a little, even for the landscape part, it was from a photograph that I had taken. And so I may start bringing in a little bit more of that realistic landscape into some of my backgrounds, but we'll see. So yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, that's back to the beginning. So thank you all again for listening.
We have a few minutes for questions and stuff like that. I just want to know how you do this so tight and how you get such clear lines.
Yeah, patience, basically, I guess. Just my style, my natural style. It has gotten, I don't know if you could really were thinking about it or noticed it, but over the years, and especially if you look at the original paintings, it has gotten much more tight. I still started off fairly meticulous from the beginning, but...
And how long does it take to do a piece?
Usually a couple months. I find that, especially a piece like this, let's see, like I said, a 24 by 30, a little bit bigger. Yeah, a couple months on average. I find that I get 6 or 7 paintings done in a year. So, yeah.
Wow.
So what medium are you working in?
Oh, acrylic.
No.
Yeah, and it's all hand done by brush. A lot of people ask if there's digital elements or airbrush or anything like that, but
You do airbrushing though, right?
no, it's just all hand.
Really?
hand
I'm
brush,
impressed that you're not not doing airbrushing by some of the dimensions you've got.
Yeah,
Because
That's impressive.
acrylic, it dries so quickly, and it's hard
Yeah.
to blend, I find.
Yeah, I use a slow dry medium that gives me a little bit more time, but it's still a matter of minutes, and just kind of devised a technique a little bit to try to get my backgrounds, especially the larger areas, blended.
Yes, it's beautiful,
Thank you.
beautiful blending.
Excellent, it's
Yes.
beautiful.
And they're truly amazing.
You kind of have a natural, kind of sacred geometry kind of technique that you're also playing with, it looks like
Yeah.
to me, in terms of my background.
Yeah, there is a little bit of that kind of naturally. Yeah, a little bit of geometry in there. I'm not super familiar with sacred geometry. I mean, I've done a little bit of reading on it more recently, but yeah, just more of kind of a natural,
Intuitive. Yeah.
intuitive.
Well, you see it naturally
Yeah.
in Eccles' work,
Yeah.
even though
Right.
he's drawn it, but it's
Yes.
under a microscope, but it's,
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
shows you sacred geometry in nature, that's
Yeah,
what it is.
exactly. Yeah, it's just
Well, your
I
work
really like-
is certainly unique.
Thank you.
Unique.
Thanks.
I've never seen anything similar.
Thank you.
And she had
Yeah, I really liked your woodwork too.
Oh.
It looked very elegant
Yes, thank you.
and airy, and that whole concept, the way you put them together was plaster, and I would have never thought of that.
Oh, thank you.
Wire.
Thank
But
you.
it made the shape, I like wood, natural
Mhm.
wood, and I like what you did with it.
Oh shoot, I missed those, that was in
Yeah,
the
you missed
beginning.
Oh, okay, yeah, I probably can cruise up. Nope, there they are. So, there's one.
I like outdoor spaces.
And yeah, a lot of those smooth lines from the plaster kind of came out in my painting style too. You can
Yeah.
notice a lot of
You can still see that.
Yeah, your evolution is, you can see it.
the flowing lines, the
Yeah.
clean lines.
So this is more assembly
Yeah, so it's
of natural
found
pieces.
wood pieces, just from hikes or whatever.
Where's the one with the wires?
Oh, there's wire underneath the
Oh,
plaster for a structural skeletal.
An armature.
so you're using
Yeah.
plaster for your jointing?
So the plaster is just what you see on the outside, layers of plaster, and then sanded down, sculpted down. But
Oh, so
it's
you're using the wood with plaster?
yeah, that's,
Okay, it
this
looks
is
like driftwood to me.
yeah, it is. This is wood, random found wood, and then I've added plaster elements to it. So I'll
Over wire.
stick a wire into
Yeah.
the wood for structure.
Got it.
and then
No,
the
I
wire-
know, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Really nice.
It's all beautiful work.
Thank you.
I don't know how you have that much patience.
I was just gonna say that. All those intricate little things you.
And where you got those teensy tiny brushes.
Right? Yeah.
And do you mostly paint on canvas? Do you do any wood paintings or just mostly on canvas?
Pretty much always canvas.
Just have excellent
Earlier,
dexterity.
I'd use whatever materials I could find, and so I have a few paintings on like masonite board, but and I may do some more of that again too, because it starts at such a nice clean surface. You can buy the pre-gessoed,
Yeah.
like smooth surfaces, but
How do you just blend and get them so flat and blended at the same time? Those just, it's amazing.
yeah, that's like the slow dry medium helps since I'm using acrylics, and I'll get my colors like in this background sky, for example. Get my colors pre-mixed, throw them on the canvas in clumps, globs, and then just with a larger brush start brushing them together, blending them together as quickly as I can, and then sometimes I'll have to kind of spray it down a little bit with water to keep it from drying. And, yeah.
What's your website?
MicahOfstedahl.com,
Yeah,
which is
there's
hard
some
to
cards
spell,
up
but I
there.
have
Yeah,
cards
cards are great.
over here,
Great.
so, yeah.
Do you have other wood ones that you did?
Um,
Did you show?
so There, I showed a few, so that
Oh,
one,
there,
this
yeah,
one,
okay,
and
okay.
this one.
Uh-huh.
I think
Oh, that was a
just
nice
those three I showed. I think I did 8 or 9 of them, and
Uh-huh.
I still have a few of them, and
Mhm.
just at home.
That's
I
would be
sold a
great.
couple, but
Mhm.
and then some of them you may have missed, but some of them are just either in the landfill or decomposing
Oh,
in
no,
my
I know, or
backyard,
in your garden,
you know,
yeah,
yeah,
in the back of the
yeah,
garden.
Some
No.
of those. There's just this one, for example, just kind of fell apart, and I just left it
Yeah,
in my
yeah,
yard.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
But the college days, exploring mediums, it's just part of the,
Yep.
you know, yeah.
Well,
Well,
you're
he
very
has,
talented,
he also has
lovely.
a sketchbook up here, gently, touch it gently, wish
Yeah, I
I'd
feel-
had some gloves.
Oh, it's fine. It's just a sketchbook. Yeah, feel free to look through that
Hey.
and my inspirational books, and if you want to ask me any
Thank you so
questions.
much, Micah.